I want you to picture a metalhead. What do you see? Long, greasy hair, maybe a leather jacket, standing in the back of a smoky venue screaming at a wall of noise.
Pretty much. I think of a dropout, someone who is angry at their parents, angry at the system. Definitely not someone I would trust with a calculus problem.
That is the stereotype. That is the image mainstream culture has sold you for 40 years. But there is a strange urban legend that persists in the back alleys of academia. A whisper that says if you walk into the math department of MIT or the coding bunker of a top-tier hedge fund, you won't hear Mozart playing. You will hear Slayer.
That sounds like a myth invented by metalheads to make themselves feel better. The Mozart effect is the famous one. Classical music makes you smarter. You are telling me that listening to people scream about graveyards actually boosts your IQ.
I am saying the data suggests something far more interesting. We are not talking about a magical potion that turns a fool into a genius. We are talking about a specific type of brain that craves a specific type of fuel. And it turns out, the fuel that high-performance engines run on sounds a lot like a jet engine exploding.
So it is not that the music makes them smart, but that smart people choose the music.
That is the distinction we are going to tear apart today. We are going to investigate the death metal paradox. Why does the most abrasive, chaotic, and aggressive music on Earth attract the most analytical and high-functioning minds?
Okay, I am skeptical. Show me the proof.
Let's look at the data. Open the file to page 1.
The myth of noise. And we are starting with lyrical analysis. 52% lexical diversity.
This is the first crack in the stereotype. The urban legend claims metal makes you smarter. That is a seductive lie, but the correlation is aggressive. Look at the data from Prodigy Education. They analyze the lyrical complexity of various genres. +1.
And
while mainstream pop music often has the vocabulary of a third grader, heavy metal legends like Black Sabbath clock a lexical diversity of 52% that rivals the literary density of Pink Floyd.
wait, Black Sabbath, the Iron Man guys, they have the same vocabulary range as the kings of progressive rock.
Exactly. And look at the table. Slayer is at 51%. The pop average sits at 29%. This isn't just screaming. It is a high-bandwidth information stream. +1.
But can you even understand the words? It is usually just growling.
That is the hook. It is counterintuitive. This genre is associated with mindless aggression. Yet it possesses the highest verbal intelligence requirements of any modern genre. To enjoy this, your brain has to be running at a clock speed high enough to decode it. +1.
So if I listen to it and just hear noise, that says more about my processing power than the music.
It suggests you might not have the decryption key. The music doesn't create the intelligence. The intelligence demands the density. If you can't parse the code, it sounds like chaos. But for the high-functioning mind, it is a rich lexical feast. +1.
That is a very convenient argument for the fans. You just aren't smart enough to get it. But who are these high-functioning minds? Are they actually smart? Or do they just own a thesaurus?
We have the demographics to prove it. Turn to page 2.
The gifted outsider. The image is a lonely kid with headphones. Top 5% of academy students.
Mainstream media sells you the blue pill narrative. The metalhead is a delinquent, but the National Academy for Gifted and Talented Youth in the UK, NAGTY, ran the numbers. +1.
And what did they find?
Among students in the top 5% of academic performance, a third identified heavy metal as their preferred genre.
1 in 3. That is incredibly high. That is way above the general population average.
It is. So you have to ask, why? Why do the smartest kids in the room lock themselves away with the darkest music?
The slide mentions alienation. Being gifted is a social burden.
Exactly. These kids experience a cognitive load that their peers cannot comprehend. They are isolated by their own hardware. Dr. Cadwallader's research suggests they don't listen to metal to rebel against their parents. +1.
Then why do they do it?
To purge. This aggressive music serves as a necessary catharsis. It is a system to process the negativity and isolation inherent in being structurally different from the herd. +1.
So it is a shield.
It is a sonic shield. They are the intellectual elite, utilizing this noise to survive a world that moves too slowly for them.
Okay, so they are lonely and smart, and the music helps them vent. That makes sense, psychologically, but is there a biological reason? Is their brain actually wired differently?
It is wired fundamentally differently, and this is where we get into the architecture of the mind. Go to page 3.
Systemizing the chaos. We have a brain scan here. Type S correlation.
Let's look at the hardware. Why does a high IQ brain crave technical death metal? The answer lies in the Empathizing-Systemizing theory by Baron Cohen. +1.
I have heard of this. It divides people into those who focus on emotions and those who focus on rules.
Correct. The brain has two distinct drives: empathy, emotional resonance, and systemizing, analyzing rules and patterns. High IQ individuals, particularly in STEM, skew heavily toward Type S, the systemizers. +1.
So they are the engineers, the coders, the mathematicians.
Yes, and they don't listen to music to feel a warm hug. They listen to deconstruct a machine. They perceive music as a complex mathematical object. +1.
And metal provides that object.
Technical death metal is defined by rapid time signature changes, polyrhythms, and machine-like precision. To a normal listener, that is jarring. To a systemizer, it is a puzzle. +1.
The slide says, they are not feeling the chaos, they are solving it.
Exactly. It provides the structural complexity required to engage a brain obsessed with analyzing input-operation-output relations. While an empathizer might weep to a ballad, the systemizer finds euphoria in decoding the algorithmic ferocity of a blast beat. +1.
It is like they are listening to a calculus equation.
They are listening to a deterministic cognitive puzzle. If the music is too simple, there is nothing to solve, which leads us to the problem with pop music.
Let me guess, it is too easy.
It is thermodynamically boring. Turn to page 4.
Information entropy. A vibrating string visual. Maximization of entropy.
We are looking at the software now. Information theory tells us that the brain craves prediction, but it despises redundancy. +1.
Redundancy, meaning repetition.
Meaning, I know exactly what is coming next. Pop music is high redundancy. Verse, chorus, 4/4 time. It is predictable. It is safe. And for a high-performance brain, it is excruciating. +1.
So they need surprisal.
That is the technical term. Entropy measures the uncertainty or surprisal in a signal. Analysis of technical metal reveals an architecture designed to maximize this information entropy. +1.
How?
By using non-standard structures, dissonant intervals, and avoiding repetition. Every bar is a new piece of data.
The slide calls it a high-bandwidth data stream.
Precisely, for a brain capable of rapid processing. This high-entropy environment is the only place it feels engaged. The blue pill listener hears a mess. The high IQ listener hears a data stream dense enough to occupy their cognitive bandwidth. +1.
It is an economic exchange.
The brain trades attention for complexity. If the music is too simple, the high IQ brain disengages. Death metal provides the necessary bitrate to keep the system running at optimal efficiency. +1.
But there is a social cost to this. We talked about the stigma earlier. If you walk around playing this stuff, people think you are weird. Why pay that price?
That price is the point. Move to page 5.
Costly signaling. A mechanical peacock feather. That is a striking image.
We need to look at the source code. Evolutionary psychology. Why would an organism voluntarily subject itself to unpleasant stimuli? +1.
The handicap principle. The peacock's tail.
Right. A peacock grows a massive tail that makes it hard to fly and easy to spot by predators. It is a burden, but that burden proves he is strong enough to survive despite it. +1.
So listening to metal is a flex.
It is the cognitive equivalent of the peacock's tail. It imposes a massive cognitive and social cost. It requires immense energy to parse the distortion, and it risks social ostracization. +1.
So by doing it, they are signaling, I am smart enough to handle this.
Subconsciously, yes, they are broadcasting. My neural processing power is so surplus that I can afford to process this chaos and find pleasure in it.
It is an honest signal of genetic and cognitive fitness.
They are not listening despite the difficulty. They are listening because of the difficulty. It is a display of dominance over the sensory environment.
That creates a very different picture than the angry dropout. It is essentially intellectual vanity.
Or intellectual necessity, which brings us back to the core urban legend. Does the music cause the IQ, or does the IQ demand the music?
The slide calls it the causality glitch. Page 6.
We have a glitching Mozart here. The urban legend says music creates intelligence. That is the Mozart effect fallacy. Science has debunked that. +1.
So, what is the reality?
The arousal and mood hypothesis. Music regulates the brain's operating state.
Regulates it how?
High IQ individuals often suffer from under-arousal in mundane environments. Their engines stall at idle speeds. They get bored easily. They get restless.
So they need a stimulant.
Intense music acts as that stimulant. It raises physiological arousal to an optimal level for cognitive performance.
The slide mentions a study by Sharman and Dingle. Induced anger extreme metal listening. +1.
They made people angry, then played them metal. Result 1, heart rate stabilized. Result 2, subjective inspiration increased. +1.
So the aggressive music actually calmed them down.
It does not create chaos. It metabolizes it by matching the listener's physiological arousal. The music validates their internal state.
It is arousal matching.
Exactly. The music is not the source of intelligence. It is the fuel injection system that allows the high-performance engine to run without stalling.
The smart kid isn't smart because he listens to Slayer. He listens to Slayer so he can tolerate a world that moves too slowly for him. That is actually quite tragic.
It is. And as the world gets simpler, the problem gets worse. Let's look at the future. Page 7.
Cognitive horizon. Optimal arousal zone.
What is the horizon? As our world becomes optimized by artificial intelligence and stripped of friction, the structural density of daily life is plummeting. +1.
Everything is being dumbed down.
We are designing a world for the blue pill mind. Predictable, safe, redundant. In this landscape, The high IQ individual becomes a refugee. +1.
So they are running to the fringes.
They migrate to the jagged edges of extreme genres like technical death metal, not for rebellion, but for survival.
The slide references the Yerkes-Dodson law. Performance improves with arousal up to an optimal point.
And for the high IQ, high systemizing brain, that threshold for optimal arousal is elevated. They need more noise to feel normal.
So the correlation is a warning. Intelligence requires friction.
Without the cognitive resistance provided by complex, high-entropy systems, the gifted mind atrophies. They retreat into the noise because it is the only place left where the signal is dense enough to make them feel alive. +1.
So when I see that kid with the headphones, blasting noise that sounds like a construction site,
Don't pity him. He is the only one in the room, running at full capacity. The future of intelligence is not in silence. It is in the screen.
I'll meet myself